So, of course, in all stories, and actually the Bible has really, really great storytellers. I mean, the people that wrote these stories are very, very clever. Of course, it would have been oral tradition in those days, and they passed the stories down and down. But they're great writers, and as the story goes, there's a plot twist at this point in David's life. Now, if you were kind of writing it as an easy story, then it would be just the only way is up, as the song goes. And so far, he's been anointed as king. Wasn't quite central there, so I thought I'd centre it. And he's had success. He's defeated Goliath. He's become part of the king's court, and then he's a commander in the army. The people love him. Success follows success follows success. And, it's fantastic. He's popular. He's promoted. Everything's working towards that ultimate goal of becoming king. But then it all changes. And as we come into the story this morning, it's David who's on the run. He's a fugitive, and it's very much the wilderness years, living in caves and, just escaping all the time to different places, and looking nothing like a king at all. So let's have a think about that this morning, and we're going to start with the reading. So we've got to chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, and David went to Nob, I think that's probably how it's pronounced, as in Job, I'm just guessing, but to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" And David answered Ahimelech the priest, and he's a bit evasive really as to what he's really up to. He says, "The king sent me on a mission and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about the mission I'm sending you on. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place.'" Not quite true, but anyway. "Now then, what do you have here on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever else you can find." But the priest answered David, "I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women." And David replied, "Indeed, women have been kept from us, as usual whenever I set out. The men's bodies are holy even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today?" So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord, that's in the tabernacle, and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. Now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd. David asked Ahimelech, "Don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was urgent." The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." That day David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Now this is where it becomes a bit weird, because Gath's where Goliath comes from, in the Philistine land. So he's decided to somehow go to the Philistines. And went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." So he's become famous even in Philistine. David took these words to heart, and he was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. I told you it gets strange. Achish said to his servants, "Look at the man. He's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me?" Obviously a lot of madmen in Philistine land. "Must this man come into my house?" So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brother and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. From there, David went to Mizpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, "Would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do for me?" So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah." So David left and went to the forest of Hereth. There's a bit of a gap in the story here because I don't read it all, but in the next bit, Saul finds out all about the priests, Ahimelech, helping David, and in the end, Doeg, his shepherd, kills them. And none of his men would kill the priest, but because he's a foreigner, he didn't mind killing all the priests. So that all happens in between. But one of the priests, the son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. You see how bad things have got with Saul at this stage. Then David said to Abiathar, "That day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, 'I'm responsible for the death of your whole family. Stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who wants to kill you is trying to kill me too. You will be safe with me.'" So, the first thing I want to draw out from the story really is that God sometimes removes things. He strips things away from us. I chose that first song this morning for a good reason. The giving and taking away, Matt Redman's song, because it talks about really a lot of what this story is about. So sometimes, we go through seasons with God and in our walk with him. And there are some seasons when we I would describe it as walk into autumn. And in autumn, of course, that things are stripped away, the leaves fall and die, and it's that kind of season. And I think that's the kind of season that David's being brought into by God. He's removing things from him. He removes his position at court. He removes his job. He's no longer a commander in the army. He removes his security because he's on the run. And he removes his comforts because he's not living in a palace, but he's in a cave. I don't know, it'd be a damp cave, probably not in that climate, but he's hidden away in a bit of a rough place in a cave. He's removed the idea of the promise of being a king and the fulfillment of that promise. Instead of drawing nearer, it draws further and further away in this next season of David's life. He loses his wife. He's had to flee from his home, and Michal, Saul's daughter, he never sees. Well, no, he does see her again, but in the meantime, Saul gives his wife to somebody else. Strange goings on, but that's what happens. So he loses his wife. He loses Samuel, the prophet, never sees him again, and by the time David comes to power, Samuel is dead. He loses Jonathan, his best friend. We saw that in the last talk I did, that there was that deep parting between them, and they wept together, and they never saw each other again. And in this passage, he also strips David even of his self-respect, because as he's gone to Gath, to the Philistines, he realises he's in trouble. Whether he thought he could get away with not being recognised, I don't know. But anyway, commentators think that he's imprisoned, and as he's imprisoned, he thinks maybe the only way I can get out of that is to pretend to be mad, and so he starts drooling and scrawling odd marks on the walls or gates, and so he's lost even his self-respect. The odd thing about this is, well, not the odd thing, but God has a bit of a track record of doing this with people. That's the thing. And he might do it with you and me. That's why I'm forewarning you, really. But if you think of Abraham's given the promise of the promised land and to have descendants as many as the stars in the sky and the sand on the shore, and yet he can't conceive. He gets older and older and older. And he's 90 odd by the time God miraculously does it. But in the meantime, he's trying to do it himself. Or you think of Joseph who has these dreams about leadership when he's quite young, And it all unravels because he tells his brothers, and of course his brothers don't like it, and he's his father's favourite, so all his elder brothers, being the youngest brother, think initially they're going to kill him, but then eventually they just sell him off into slavery, and he goes off to Egypt as a slave and ends up in prison, and it's looking very, very far from what God has promised him to do. Moses, called to be the leader of his people, but kills the Egyptian slave driver and ends up in the wilderness too, herding sheep and not leading the people at all. And then, probably the most dramatic example, of course, of people having stuff removed is Job. Poor old Job, who loses everything, literally, his physical health. So, God sometimes does this. Now, it's not because God is mean, or he likes playing tricks on people, or he's passive aggressive, or he thinks, I'll get them back. I'll take this away or that way. It's because he's leading us forward. That's why he does it. It's because he's leading us to somewhere else, somewhere new. And often, as we know, to learn that depth of trust that we need for those higher positions, or whatever it might be, that next level of calling, we learn those in the times of adversity. That's just the simple truth. We learn far more in times of adversity than we do in times of blessing. And I know that's been true for me. So we may lose a ministry. We may lose a role. We may lose something physical. Something actually about our not being able to do something physically suddenly. We may lose our job. We may lose certain relationships at times. We may even lose the felt presence of God. If you know those that have written about spiritual life and spiritual disciplines, they talk about something known as the dark night of the soul. And this is where God hasn't gone, but his felt presence goes. And I've known this in my own life. And again, it's not that he's being perverse. It's just that he's leading us to go deeper, to find him again. We may lose past ways of working. Some ways of working in ministry that used to be blessed and used to be the way, and God seemed to be just his power was all over it. And now it's gone. So there's loads of ways in which God sometimes takes us through a season where he strips things away and takes them away because he's calling us to a new level. In my own story, I've known this to happen. I started preaching when I was 18, and through my life, there's been seasons when God has stopped me doing it for various reasons, different churches and so on. You might be thinking at this moment, why on earth did God start him up again? That's been the case. There's been these seasons of life when suddenly I've gone into sort of a wilderness of calling almost. But he does it because he's leading me somewhere else and leading me on. The most dramatic time of that was when, and I've mentioned it loads of times before, but when I went through the process to become an Anglican vicar and they turned me down. And on the day the bishop phoned me, this is really ironic, the day the bishop phoned me to say that I hadn't got through the selection process, I was being made redundant from my job. So I had no job, no ministry, absolutely nothing. And for 12 months we had no income coming in. It was miraculous. But in that time, God's presence was there. So what I want to say to you is if you find you're going through a season of autumn and a season when, like David, things suddenly seem to be stripped away, don't be put off by that. It's not because God doesn't love you. It's because he's preparing you for something deeper and for something more. You know that we do go through times when God's calls us to new levels in our faith and in our love and in our service to him. And to get to that new level, you have to often have things stripped away. That's how it is, as an athlete. If you want to, probably to get to a certain level, maybe county standard in some sport, you have to give up certain things to do that. But if you want to become an international at badminton, or what I just mentioned badminton, off the top of my head, or whatever, if you wanted to play for England as a badminton player, you'd have to do more training and strip out more of your life to focus on it. And if you want to get to the Olympics, well, then you have to strip everything away because it's so competitive. To get to that level, then you need to lay aside so much. And that's kind of how it is with God. That's what he does with us. He strips things away, not from our choice, but because he knows he wants to take us to that next level. And it is hard. It's not an easy thing to go through. David, as you know, the great psalm writer, pours out his heart in several places about this. And he writes, there's 4 or 5 psalms that are written in this period of time, either when he's in prison in Gath or he's in the cave. One of them is Psalm 56, and I thought it was worth this is one that the title says this was written when he was in prison in Gath. Okay, so when Achish has got hold of him. This is just a few extra verses from it. It says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God whose word I praise. In God I trust, and I am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise. In God I trust, and I am not afraid. What can man do to me? I am under vows to you, my God. I will present my thank offerings to you. For you have delivered me from death, and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life." So there, in between some of that, David talks about, God collecting his tears because he's so upset and crying and just bewildered about what's happening to him in his life. But he still has this great level of trust. And that verses 12 and 13, where he talks about, I've got my vows to you, and I will give my offerings to you. You can only do that at the tabernacle. So he's basically saying, I trust you. You will lead me out of this. Where I am now, I know you will rescue me, and I will be back one day before the tabernacle, before God, giving my offering. I trust you that you'll do that. So David is in anguish through all of this, but he trusts God. He trusts God, and that's the key thing. And we know, and I've spoken about this before, but David, of course, is a type of Jesus, or a forerunner of Jesus in many ways. And in this respect, of course, he's like Jesus too. Because Jesus, in the ultimate sense, had everything stripped away from him. All the power that he had since the beginning of time as creator of the world. And it's stripped away until he's there, naked, in shame, hanging on a cross with absolutely nothing for you and me. So, and yet he does it. He does it because he trusts God. Even in that worst moment when he says on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's even lost the presence of the Father in those moments as he takes the sin of the world upon himself. So, but he goes to the cross for you and me because he still trusts God. He still trusts in what God is doing, and he has that wonderful, amazing grace to do what he did for us. So sometimes we go into the autumn of life, and God removes things from us. But the good thing is that as we do that, God also provides for us. And we see that in the story. And I know I've said I've been through these times in my life, but always I've known the sustenance of God in them. We find a number of things that God provides. He provides, first of all, this bread of the presence as he goes to Abiathar the priest. Now that's bread that he shouldn't have had, because according to the law, as it's laid down in Leviticus and Exodus, the bread of the presence is the bread that was daily renewed every morning in the tabernacle, freshly baked, and it would sit there for the day, and then in the morning the priest would remove it. But the only person who was allowed to eat, or the only people that were allowed to eat the bread afterwards, was the priests. And David is not a priest. He's not from the tribe of Levi, from a descendant of Aaron. But in his need, he's allowed in grace to eat and have the bread of the presence on this occasion. And we know that this, you know the story, that Jesus actually endorsed it. When he was criticised for picking the ears of corn on a Sunday with his disciples, he said to them, don't you know that story? About when God broke the rules for David. And, he says, the Sabbath isn't made for man, but, man isn't made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. So he says, on this occasion in grace, God breaks the rules for David and allows him to have the bread of the presence. And I think it's significant because all of the things that were in the tabernacle represent something. There's the candlestick and all the rest of it. But the bread, I think, represents the presence of God. It's called the bread of the presence. But it's the very life. That's what bread is symbolic of in the Bible. It's the life of God. And it's the life of God and the presence of God is in the tabernacle. But he allows David to have it. And it's like he's saying, don't worry. The bread of the presence is with you. My presence is going to be with you through this season that I'm taking you into. And I know from my own experience that that's always true. That the presence is there in a way that is remarkable. Certainly through those 12 months when I was out of work and wandering in the wilderness, God did amazing things. And I knew his presence in a way that I probably never felt since, in some ways. So God provides his presence. He provides a way of escape. Because he does this, the Bible's very enigmatic sometimes about whether things are good or bad. It doesn't always say. This trip to Gath, to the Philistines, you think, should he have done that? Was God in that? And the Bible's remarkably silent sometimes. It kind of, you make your own mind up, I suspect it wasn't the right thing to do, but and he kind of hints at that in that Psalm 56. He talks about deliverance and an escape. So he provides this way of escape, and I think that David's thinking. In fact, he does this again. This is the strange thing. He goes to Achish, king of Gath, later on in chapter 27. This time he goes with his 600 followers, so maybe it's a bit different by then. But I didn't put this up. I'll go back. Anyway, so a way of escape. And he provides, in the Psalm 56 we just read, it says that he provided a way of escape. He said, you delivered me. And I think maybe that this strange idea of pretending to be mad and drooling, maybe he's saying that was your idea, God. I mean, I've got myself into a hole, but maybe you've just given me a way out, that he'll let me go. So and I was, it shows how my mind works sometimes, but I was just thinking about this and thinking, actually, in a way, madness is the way out for us. Because doesn't Paul talk about the cross being foolishness? And most people, when these days in our culture, if you say you're a Christian, they do think you're a bit mad. You might as well be drooling down your beard for all they think of us. But and it is in the worldly sense to escape the world. And if Philistia and the king of Gath represents that, then to escape the world you have to be willing to be slightly mad and foolish in their eyes, because the way of the cross is foolishness. But anyway, David is given a way of escape. When he gets into trouble, he's provided with a new prophet. He's lost Samuel, but he gains a prophet called Gad, who gives him this word about, don't stay in the stronghold, go to the forest. He's given a new priest, because Samuel was both prophet and priest, but he's given a prophet and a separate priest, Abiathar. And as the story goes on, he relies quite heavily on Abiathar, because he gets him to inquire for God before he makes various decisions to do things. So he's given the help of a prophet and a priest, and he gets a new team. I mean that as he's sitting in the cave, I'm not sure it's a team I would want really, but anyway, because he says that all of those who are in distress or in debt or discontented gathered round him, and he became their leader, about 400 men. I picture him sitting in the cave thinking, oh, not you. Oh, dear. I don't know, maybe not. But He's surrounded by this new team, which is a bit of a mishmash of ne'er-do-wells. You kind of get the impression, really. But a typical church, that's absolutely right. Which is my next point, really. I mean, it doesn't sound very promising, but God provides in all of these ways to get David through this next season in his life. And it is interesting, actually, that description of those people who went to David in the cave. It reminded me that those are the people that actually God does call. He calls the distressed, and the Hebrew word really literally means somebody who's in crisis or really stressed out. And those are the people that God calls to himself. In a way, we all have to be in a point of crisis to come to God. We have to realise that we need help. And you kind of get the impression that these guys thinking, no, we need a leader, we need help. They're also those that are in debt. So they've made a bit of a mess of life, whether that's through their own fault or not. They've made a mess. And it was interesting to me thinking about it, that the New Testament often describes sin as being like a debt. The parables that Jesus told, it was the man who was in debt and the debtor. And it's described as the Greek word really means someone who's in debt. So he does call sinners, and those that recognise that they're in debt are the ones that come. And he calls those that are discontented. If you're quite content with life, then the chances are you won't come to God. You won't come to Jesus. You won't come to the true King. But those who are discontented, who feel that there's something more, there's something missing, there's something I need, are the ones who God calls. So he does call a bit of a mishmash of people together. And we're all, as Paul said in Corinthians, he doesn't call many famous or wise, he calls those who are nobodies and nothings, and those who are in debt and distressed and discontented. But he calls to them and he gathers them around him and says, come and be with me, and I will make something of your life. And that's what David does with his little, quite a large gang of 400, which suddenly becomes 600 a bit later. But anyway, this is who God calls. We aren't special. We aren't blessed in many ways with the discontented and distressed and those in crisis. But the moments of crisis are the moments when God